Why is it so hard to keep hoping? Hope is a wonderful thing. Hope is a powerful thing. It's a thing that I think most of us would say we recognize that we need in our lives. So why is it so difficult for us to get back up again when we face disappointments and to keep hoping in the world? Join us. There are 2 chairs here, 2 chairs here. God bless you. Love you. Get in here. I know you feel embarrassed that I called you out, but we just want you in here. We don't want anyone looking around back there going, where can I sit? Just get in here. Why is it so hard to... There's a book that I enjoy, that I keep coming back to over the last 20 years. It's a fantasy novel called Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Anyone know it? Susanna Clarke, British writer. The BBC made it. Yes. It's just a wonderful, wonderful book. And it's a book that sort of is around the time of the Napoleonic Wars, and it's this wonderful fantasy about the revival of English magic. And there is this malevolent fairy in the book who kidnaps people and takes them to his house in the fairy realm. But the fairy realm is like, they can only go there in their sleep. So he's sort of kidnapping them at night, like in their dreams. And he doesn't think he's malevolent. He only kidnaps people and takes them to his house when he thinks they're missing something that they should have gotten in this world, but that they don't have. Maybe someone should have had stature, and they didn't get it in this world. Someone should have had wealth and riches, and they didn't get it in our world. Someone should have been recognized as beautiful in the way that they actually are, and they didn't get it in this world. And so he takes them to his house, and he gives them in his house the things that they were hoping for but didn't get in this world. And at first, people go to his house, and they're like, yes, incredible, amazing. But the problem is that they're there at night, and they're there in particular like in their dreams. And so they're awake in their dreams, just reveling in all the things that he's giving them at his house, and they just get more and more tired because they're not resting. They're not actually sleeping. And so they're at his house getting everything they hoped for, and then they wake up into the waking world, and they're exhausted. And their health deteriorates. They can't talk. They're under a spell. They can't talk about what it is that's happening to them. And they just become recluses in the world. And they become imprisoned in this guy giving them in their dreams the things that they hope for. And his house that he takes them to is called Lost Hope. Because actually, once they're there, what they wanted, what they hoped for, becomes instead the frantic, exhausting pursuit of something that now they can't get out of. This thing that they hope for has become this prison that they keep orbiting around frantically for their entire lives. And all they want to do is get out. Their actual hopeful posture in their life has been lost. They maybe have gotten something they wanted, but they're not hopeful people anymore. They live in lost hope. Hope is an incredible, powerful thing. Hope can also be an incredible, painful thing when we are longing for something that we haven't gotten, or we're longing for something that we didn't get. And at the same time, we look in our lives and say, generally, a hopeful disposition, the ability to keep hoping, is a valuable thing in the world. We look at hopeful people and we recognize them as joyful, as strong, oftentimes of having stores of grace and generosity, things to give away to other people. We look at a hopeful disposition and want it in our own lives, and yet we all know the pain of having hope for something and having not gotten it. It's this strange tension, isn't it? That we often hope for specific things, but that if we don't get that specific thing, our ability to be hopeful people diminishes. We want something, we have a specific hope, but sometimes having a specific hope can erode our ability to be hopeful people. How do we stay hopeful people? How do we get the power of hope into our lives, even as we're living in a world where it is just reality that some of the things that we hope for are going to come to pass and some of the things are not? How do we not allow that to make us erode our ability to stay hopeful in our lives? This is the question that we're going to be asking today. I've titled today's sermon, The Light of Hope. We're starting a short Advent series today called The Bright Valley. Life is a valley. Life in this world is a valley. And the valley often in the Bible is a physical sign of a spiritual reality, of a low place, a dark place, a place of feeling lost, a place that we feel like we descended into and don't know that we'll ever get out of. And the good news of the Advent season is that though we are still in this time in the valley, that God has lit the valley up with various lights of his presence that help the valley shine with the presence of God even as we're walking through it. And there are 4 such lights that we remember in the Advent season: hope, peace, joy, and love. And today we're looking at the light of hope. The sermon text for today is Isaiah chapter 2, verses 1 to 5. All of the texts are going to be from Isaiah because the prophet Isaiah has a number of passages that are referring specifically to the coming of our Messiah and the Lord Jesus Christ. And so Isaiah is a book of the Bible that we read often specifically around Advent because it's full of hope for the coming of the Son of God. Again, we're in Isaiah chapter 2, verses 1 to 5. I will read the text aloud. If you have a device or a Bible, I'd encourage you to open up to the text. If you've got a Bible, just maybe kind of flip to the middle. Isaiah's a big... We've been in Jonah recently, and I've been trying to help you find Jonah. Isaiah's way easier to find. Flip to the middle. If you're at Jeremiah, back up a little bit. If you're at the Psalms, go forward a little bit. You'll get there. Isaiah chapter 2, verses 1 to 5. I'll read the text aloud. The word that Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. It shall come to pass in the later days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be lifted up above the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it. And many people shall say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations and shall decide disputes for many peoples, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord. What is hope? Oxford Languages defines hope as a feeling of expectation and desire for a certain thing to happen. A feeling of expectation and a desire for a certain thing to happen. And so hope is characterized by two things. The first thing that hope is characterized by is a positive disposition towards some certain thing. If you don't have a positive disposition towards it, you're not hoping for it. You have a positive disposition towards some event, something, some person, something, a positive disposition. But the second thing that is necessary for hope to be present is that that thing that you have a positive disposition towards has to be future. It's not here, not yet. That word yet is incredibly important for the creation of hope. It's future. It's coming. We have an expectation of it. These are the two things that are necessary for hope. A positive disposition towards something that is not yet present. That is, at this time, future. And this text today is about people who had a positive disposition towards something that was not yet present. This text is about hope. Isaiah chapter 2, verse 2. Positive disposition towards a thing. And of course we get this wonderful vision, right? Of all this positive stuff that's going to happen. But that is the thing that is in the prophet's focus in the first moment. This positive vision. There's the first element of hope. And then second, shall come to pass in the latter days, in the later days, in the future days. Something that we are longing for, a vision that we're longing for, will come to pass in the future. A hope. There's a hope. The prophet Isaiah is saying there's a future hope that we are all looking for, and then he unfolds the vision. This text today is about hope. It has both the positive vision of something desirable and recognizes that it is future. Now, hopes don't grow up out of context. We don't just randomly start hoping. Generally, we start hoping when we feel like we're in some sort of a valley or a challenging situation. Hope rises up when we recognize ourselves in some place in our lives as a place that needs hope in order for us to keep going through it. And the people that Isaiah was prophesying in this time, in this text, were in just such a place where they needed hope to rise up. Verse 1 of chapter 2 says, the word that Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. Isaiah the prophet was a historical dude who lived and prophesied to the southern kingdom of Judah, because you all know, because you're great Bible scholars, that there was once a united kingdom of Israel that split. They had a civil conflict that split into a northern kingdom that retained the name of Israel and the southern kingdom that took on the name Judah, the ancestral tribal designation of the major tribe that characterized the southern kingdom. And Isaiah was prophesying to the southern kingdom in a time of real challenge, of real instability, of mercurial leadership, where they would go between one king who followed God and did good things for the people and one king who was just a total maniac who did all sorts of awful stuff and everybody stuff, mercurial leadership, and then the creation of these empires who are increasingly on the gates of Judah, trying to force them into a sort of tributary relationship or trying to outright conquer them. And so Isaiah's prophesying in a time of real challenge, real instability, and real existential crisis. He's not prophesying in the moment of like total calamity. That fell to the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah is prophesying in the moment of total calamity. Isaiah is prophesying just before that, in all the anxiety and instability of people saying, this is starting to feel bad. We're having a lot of problems. They're building up over time. This feels like we're on a slow decline. What are we going to do? And Isaiah is speaking hope, a vision of hope into the lives of those people. And our lives need hope in the same way and in the same places. Hope is the most attractive to us, the most enduring, the most powerful when hope comes to us in a place of saying, I'm going through some hard thing, often over an extended period of time. That's when the light of hope begins to shine really brightly for us. When we're in our times of instability, when we're in our times of feeling like our life is mercurial, it's just changing rapidly all the time. When we feel like we have enemies, maybe from without or within. I've got things in here that I'm doing to myself over and over again. They put me in a hard situation, and God, I need some hope that I'm going to be different, or that things in my life are going to be different. And it's in those moments in our lives when we really wake up to the reality and the desire for hope. In the places of darkness in our lives, hope is able to rise up and give us strength to help us look for a better tomorrow. It can make us carry on, sometimes with incredible endurance in difficult situations. We need hope in our lives. But if we need hope in our lives, why do we at times need to be coaxed into it? Why do we need to be reminded to keep hoping? Why at times do we even outright resist hope or fear hope or even try to kill hope at times? We need hope in our lives, but we resist hope. Notice the last verse of this passage, verse 5. O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord. Wonderful. What a wonderful exhortation. House of Jacob here is a poetic way for the prophet to refer to God's people. Jacob is the patriarch of the family of God's children, Israel. He had 12 sons, and they became the names of the 12 tribes. So to talk about the house of Jacob is to talk about all of God's people. And the text here says, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord. And that's such a wonderful, inviting exhortation, but it begs the question, doesn't it? Why are they not walking in the light of the Lord already? Why are they? The prophet's saying, here's this great, hopeful vision. Let's walk in the hope of the vision that I've just shared, that God is going to do for us. Let's walk in it. In other words, they're not walking in it already. Why would they not be walking in the hope of this vision that has been wonderfully laid out for them? And there may be a number of reasons why they might not be yet walking in the light of this hope, but I think one reason that makes a lot of contextual sense of this passage is that they're not walking in the light of this hope because it's not the hope that they want to come to pass. We read this vision and go, oh my gosh, this sounds amazing. Wow. I mean, I'm pretty sure, now I'm speaking off the cuff, someone reminded me, I think there's a building in Rockefeller Center that has Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4 engraved on the side. They'll beat their swords into plowshares and they will not learn war anymore. I mean, everybody loves this vision, right? Everyone loves it. But I think that the people who were hearing these words had a slightly different version of this hope that they were looking for. They, in a time of instability, in a time of being hard set and pressed upon by international enemies, they wanted a vision, a hopeful vision of them winning over their enemies. But God has given them a vision of being at peace with their enemies. And those are two really, really, really different things. Wow, the feeling of winning over somebody, that's a good feeling. That feels really good. That feels really satisfying. That feels like I'm up here and they're down there. That feels like I'm vindicated. I was right, they were wrong. But being at peace with, not winning over, but being at peace with, well, that is just a really, really different hope. It's a really different picture. It's much more we're on the same page. It's much more, maybe we both have things to apologize for. Maybe it wasn't all your fault. Maybe it was a little bit my fault too. And when Isaiah is giving these people this picture, people who have been hard set and hard pressed upon by their enemies for many, many years now, and who in future days are going to continue to be hard pressed upon by their enemies from without. Isaiah comes to them and says, here's a vision where you can have peace with the people around you. And people are just like, I'm just not sure that I'm there yet. And so Isaiah says, come on, let's walk in the light of this hope together. And the people are just leaning back. The hope that they were given to be at peace with their enemies is not quite the hope that they were looking for. I'm sure you know this, but in verse 4, we get a wonderful metallurgic image, right, of this vision of peace. They'll beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, right? The idea is that the very thing of a sword, the very embodiment, the object of a spear, it has no use anymore. And so they mold it into something else, into an agricultural tool. Because there literally is no use for the tools of war anymore. This isn't quite the hope that they wanted, and we are so often in our own lives struggling with our relationship with hope because we're in the same place. We don't just hope generally. We don't just want to be hopeful people generally. We don't just want to hope for other people generally. We are hoping for something specific, and we want that hope to come to pass. And if that hope doesn't come to pass, our whole relationship with hope is on the chopping block. In this, our hopes often become more like wants or even lusts than they are hopes. I wanted to get that thing. I wanted those people to win and those people to lose. I wanted to be seen a certain way. And when God comes along and gives us something that's similar to that hope but bigger, we often resist it if it doesn't come with getting the hope the way that we wanted. When God comes to us and says, what if I made a world where no one felt any more loss or pain about what they did or didn't get? What if that whole experience that you're having about your moment of lack, what if I made a world where that whole reality was gone? How many of us would say, I want that? And how many of us would say, but God, I really want this thing. And so I would rather have the pain of not getting it than have you transform reality to a place where we don't wrestle with that anymore. God comes to us and says, what if I made it so that winning and losing itself is abolished? So that we're done playing the greater than game with other people. We're done walking around trying to figure out who has the slightly higher ground. How many of us would say, gosh, that peace would be wonderful? And how many of us would say, just have it in my mind to pick on you, John. How many of us would say, the EPL is going to be on TV next week and I'm rooting for somebody to win? How many of us would say, I'm invested in some way in one side winning over another side losing? You can take it. What if God came to us and said, what if I healed you? Instead of needing to be seen a certain way by other people, like having a hope that you'll have a certain stature, what if God said, what if I healed you so that you were done sitting under the impressive views and expectations of other people? How many of us would say, okay, I want that? And how many of us would say, or can you just grant my wish over here so that I can be seen the way I want to be by other people? If we're really honest with ourselves, so often we would say to these bigger hopes, these larger visions, no, I'm not interested in them unless I get there by way of getting the thing that I am wanting. And when this happens, we actually can become an enemy of hope. Because when we're in this posture, when we're in this position, our spirits can become corrupted by not getting what we want and then begrudging the idea that other people would have their hopes fulfilled, or begrudging the idea that God might have some bigger hope for me and my life beyond what I've currently imagined and beyond what I'm specifically looking for now. And we begin to say no to all of those things. Any other hope that God might give us, we begin to say no because I didn't get hope fulfilled in my life in the way that I want it to. Instead of saying, God can do many things with my life. And the good news of that is so big and so grand and so powerful that it pulls me with hope into all sorts of situations in my life, including ones I didn't plan on being in. That hope is so strong and so magnetic and so powerful. Instead of responding that way, we say, God didn't do this thing, and so I'm not going to let him do anything else with my life. God, if you didn't do this thing with my life or in my life, or in the way that I see myself, or in the way that other people see me, I'm just taking the rest of my life off the table. I don't want you to speak hope over anything else. And when this happens, we can begin to resist hope in ourselves and even develop a posture that is like set on killing hope when we see it in other people. This is called cynicism. Now, not all cynicism is negative. Many of us have cynical or sarcastic senses of humor. That's a wonderful thing. It's a different thing to delight in a well-timed cynical or sarcastic joke, which I love to do. It's another thing to become a cynical person, right? Cynicism, and let's be clear here, because we have a lot of thinking, educated, smart people here who love to think and love to ask questions. Cynicism and critical thinking are two different things. Critical thinking is critical thinking. Critical thinking is when we ask penetrating, courageous, honest questions about things that are going on. That's critical thinking. Cynicism is a spiritual acid that says, my hopes didn't come true, and so I'm going to kill your hope by speaking in a spiritually corrosive way over the sincere hopes and expectations of other people. Cynicism is wildly popular today. It masquerades as like a sort of superiority. It masquerades as being in the know. It's just the killing of hope. That's what cynicism is when it gets into ourself all the way. We don't want to be cynical people. We want to be people that are, even in the places where we are wrestling to hold on to hope in our lives, in our own lives, don't feel the need to crush hope when we see it in other people. People need hope, and it is a gift when we see other people have sincere, simple hope in their lives. And we need to encourage that with our words and not be set on tearing it down. Because, of course, hope is a spiritual thing. And how do you kill spiritual things? With words. Words are how you kill spiritual things. We need to be people who are encouraging and build each other up in the hopes that we have when we see people clinging to hope in a dark and cynical and despondent time. In this, when we're like this, hope can become a painful and frantic thing where we are like the people who are trapped at lost hope. And our lives become this frantic and over time exhausted and despondent pursuit of one thing that we were hoping for. And because we're having trouble getting it to come to pass, our disposition as a hopeful person is becoming destroyed. We can become like these people at lost hope, where hope becomes this frantic thing that we're chasing. All of these things we do because we hope in a narrow way. We hope for specific things, and when they don't come to pass, we decided to write off hope in our own lives, and when we see it in others, we often try to kill it, or we speak disparagingly about it. We didn't respond to God's call to walk in his light by becoming a hopeful person who takes on God's hopes regardless of the dispositions that we've suffered. And so we reject hope as a posture in favor of giving in to sort of cheap and easy cultured cynicism that's so popular in our world today. We resist hope in our lives and try to kill it in this way. But the reality of hope is larger than our own wrestling with it. The reality of hope is larger than our own wrestling, and it's larger than cynicism. The light of hope is not able to be doused by our own self-centered perspectives, because the reality of hope is larger than us, and it's larger than our narrow visions, and it's bigger than our own selfish concerns. And the light of hope, true hope, shines brightly for all people. It is a large and encompassing vision that invites everybody into it, regardless of the challenges and the pains that we're experiencing in our own lives. The scope of true hope is impossibly large. The vision that Isaiah has given people here in Isaiah chapter 2 is impossibly large. Isaiah says that this vision that he's casting, all nations are going to flock to this vision. He says many peoples are going to come. When he describes the heights to which the mountain of the Lord is going to raise up, he says the highest of the mountains. It's going to dwarf all of the other mountains and hills. The vision here uses huge, large, grand language because the vision of hope that Isaiah has is a huge, large, grand hope that invites everybody in. Hope, true hope, is a large vision, and it is a large and bright light that shines beyond our own wants. It's a larger vision that we're all invited to. Hope in our lives is hard to hold on to when it's just settled on something that I need or I want in my own life. But when we allow hope to get big, when we look for a large hope, an expansive hope, that kind of a hope is powerful to stand up under the things that are disappointing in our own lives. And that gets us more out and looking for the ways the light of hope shines on the lives of other people. Where can such a large hope be found? Where can a large, expansive hope that picks me up in my disappointment and helps me look at the good news of hope for other people, where can a hope of that size be found? A large hope can be found in the hopes of God, because God has hopes. God is hoping for things. God has things that in the mind and the heart and the spirit of the living God, he looks at them and he goes, that would be a desirable future. That is something that I am longing for, and I'm longing to bring it about. And God looks at us in our lives, in our situations, and all of his big hopes are other-centered. They all are looking at our lives and saying, how can they become better and more loving and more grace-filled and more full of actual life that God has for us? And God says, your lives are not like that right now, but I have a hopeful future in store for you. And it's in store for everybody. God has hopes. And our relationship with hope, especially in the places where we are the most downtrodden and beaten down at things that haven't come to pass in our life, our relationship with hope is restored in those places when we start hoping for the things that God hopes for. That's how hope stays lit in our lives. When we hope for the things that God hopes for. God's hopes are big enough to unite people and to keep hope alive. And in this picture, we get just one look at some of the things that God hopes for in the world. What does God hope for? This is in verses 3 and 4. He hopes that God will be able to teach people his ways, in verse 3, and that people then will walk in his paths. For the law will go out from Zion and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. God hopes that in the chaos and moral insanity of this world, and in all the ways that our lives and the lives of other people are chronically every day made worse because of our behavior, that people will finally learn from God right from wrong. And that once we do, God, our lives will be better. That's something that God hopes. God hopes that the law, that his perspective on what is good and what is bad and what is right and what is wrong will go out from Jerusalem, will go out from God's people, and that people will know right and wrong, and that our lives will be infinitely better because we will walk in that light of knowing right from wrong. What else does God hope for us? God hopes that people will let him be the judge over their conflicts. Verse 4, he will judge between the nations and will decide disputes for many peoples. God has a hope that all of the pain and challenge in our lives that come up from disputes, things that we do wrong to one another, and then the ways that we handle those disputes poorly, because that's like just as painful. Someone wrongs us, but then the dispute itself is handled badly. God hopes that he will be able to judge all disputes, that he'll not only speak the truth over them in a just and fair way, but that he will settle them entirely, so that there's no more outstanding disputes of any kind between people anymore. God's hope is so dramatic that he hopes we won't even learn how to be in conflict with one another anymore. At the end of verse 4, nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. God says, the way that you conflict with one another, that's a learned thing. And I have a hope for you that you will not learn that pattern of behavior anymore. It'll be totally out of your repertoire. You won't even know where to start. Can you imagine that? We're all born into this world knowing how to start conflict. Can you imagine what it would look like to walk into a world that God has created where we are not even able to learn war and conflict anymore? These are some of the things that God hopes for, and you and I can hope for these things too. And our life can be places where the hopes of God stay bright, not just for ourselves, but for other people. That in our life situations, we hope that we ourselves and other people can learn right from wrong. And our lives will be better because of it. That in our lives, we can help to be peacemakers who resolve conflict and help people live with their disputes with one another resolved. That in our life, we can learn for ourselves and for others how to be at peace with people and not propagate conflict and teach one another how to do conflict and war. And the wonderful thing about this is that when we do this, when we stop taking our specific hopes, the things that we're hoping for, and have them as just the only orienting center of our lives, and we exchange that for the hopes of God, and we say, God, I want the center of my hopes to be the hopes that you hope for. God invites us to come back to him in that place and say, and tell me what you long for, and I long to have your hopes come true in the context of the things that I'm hoping for. Once we get out from the small, tiny box that's labeled me in our spiritual lives, we learn that in the box that is labeled the hopes of God, our hopes are already in there. God knows what you long for. God knows what you're hoping for. God knows that you want to do all the things we're talking about. You want to be a hopeful person. You want to have stuff to give to other people. And God says, will you trust me that if you get all the way out of that place of bartering with me, God, I'll follow you X amount in my life to the extent of which I've gotten X that I've... Once you leave all that behind, you can find the things that you're hoping for in the things that I'm hoping for. Because God has large and great grand hopes, but there are all sorts of biblical passages that we could look at where God has specific hopes as well. And most often, when the Bible narrates God's specific hopes, they're hopes for people who are hurting and disappointed and wounded. But we find those things when we begin first to hope for the grand picture that God hopes for. Every single person in this room is wrestling right now with something that they're hoping for that hasn't come to pass, and that's going to be true of us for the rest of our lives. Some of us in this room have done the hard work of saying, God, I'm going to follow you whether I ever get that thing or not. And I'm going to begin to hope for the things that you hope for. And the people who have done that have strength and maturity over the course of their whole life to stand up in the Lord, and they would testify that God has given them things that are good gifts and things to hope for in this life. We need to be a community where all of us have done that work with God. Where all of us have said, God, I'm getting my hopes out of the center. I'm not letting go of them, and I'm not going to be done telling you what I want. You should tell God what you want. He already knows, so you should tell him. But there is a difference between telling God what we want and trying to hold our faithfulness hostage by saying, I'm only going to follow you this much until I get this thing. It's time to move out of that, because when we do, we don't just have our lives orbiting around getting something. We actually become a person who's hopeful and who has power to hope in all sorts of different situations in our lives and has power to offer hope to other people. Our world needs the light of hope to shine. And the reality is that if our shining the light of hope, our shining the light of God's hope onto other people is totally predicated on us getting everything that we wanted, we'll be an inconstant light. The whole world will be full of inconstant lights of hope. But if there were a people who said, God, I'm first going to hope for the things that you hope for, and as I do that and believe in the things that you hope for, I become not just a person who hopes for specific things, but I become a hopeful person. I become a person who has the power to keep hoping in a dark and disappointed and disillusioned world, well, then we would have something to shine in the lives of other people. We would have the light of hope to shine in all of the valleys that people are walking through in this time. Hope for the things that God hopes for. He knows what you hope for. He knows what you long for, and he won't forget it. Move yourself out of the center of your hopes and put God there instead. And watch yourself become a person who has the power to hope in all situations. In Jesus' name, amen.